Well, my name's Jordan Swain Fox, and I'm the outreach coordinator for the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis, or CURA, at The Ohio State University. And we're glad to have you here today for our first webinar in the series Public Data for the Public Good. This series is co-sponsored by CURA and the Research Commons at the University Libraries. Throughout the series, speakers will discuss the importance and impacts of public data access, use, and preservation. And today we have Nora Mattern here today to discuss how communities can work to cultivate healthy local data ecosystems. Before we introduce Nora, I just want to mention a few logistical items. If you require closed captioning, you'll find a box at the bottom of the screen labeled CC. Click the box and select Show Subtitles, and this will allow you to view subtitles throughout the presentation. During the webinar, you can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box or function, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we can in the last portion of the presentation. If we don't get to your question, apologies in advance. You'll see that the chat has been disabled, so you can use that Q&A function too if you have any information to share with the event organizers. This event is approved for 1 AICP CM credit. To claim your CM credits after the event, log on to your My APA account on the APA website and enter the event into your online CM event log. After the webinar, you'll receive a brief survey, and if you have the time, we encourage you to provide your feedback to help us improve these events. If you have any additional questions, you can email me at swaim-fox.1@osu.edu. To learn more about CURA's future events or to sign up for our monthly newsletter, visit cura.osu.edu. You can also like CURA on Facebook and follow us on X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can learn more about the Research Commons at library.osu.edu/researchcommons. And with that, I'll pass it over to the Research Commons Geospatial Information Librarian, Josh Sidvari, to introduce our speaker for today.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Jordan. I'm really looking forward to today's presentation. Excited to introduce our speaker. Nora Mattern is a faculty member at the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh. She has 9 years of experience working with civic data as a librarian and now as an instructor in library and information sciences. She is PI of the Civic Switchboard project, an Institute of Museum and Library Services IMLS-funded project that builds capacity in libraries for civic data work, and co-PI of an NSF-funded project focused on the sustainability of CKAN, an open source data management system. She teaches a course in open government data and information for the Masters of Library and Information Science, and designed a community-oriented course on responsible data science for the University of Pittsburgh's Masters of Data Science. She holds leadership roles in responsible data initiatives at the university, including as past chair of the Year of Data in Society at Pitt in 2021-2022, and as a current steering committee member for responsible data science at Pitt in the Office of the Provost. So Nora, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you everyone for joining. This presentation will focus on collaborative work related to community data and the roles of libraries and data partners in connecting communities to data about their communities. As Josh mentioned, this work is under the umbrella of a project that we call Civic Switchboard, and I'll be sharing some background on that project and some of the major activities and approaches that we take. So thank you so much to CURA as well as the Research Commons for the invitation to be here. As Josh also mentioned, the work that we'll be sharing has been made possible through funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I will note that since I submitted that bio to Josh, you may know that the Institute of Museum and Library Services was part of an executive order that called for its dismantlement in March. And since many PIs have received termination notices on grants, our project was among the terminated grants by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. However, we were fortunate in that the work under the current grants was completed. And so we were less affected than others, but this is certainly an issue that's affecting libraries, as many folks on the call likely know. The work that I'll be sharing is part of collaborative work with folks at the University of Pittsburgh. I want to acknowledge my colleagues who are based at the University Library System at Pitt, the University Center for Social and Urban Research, as well as collaborators in the School of Computing and Information. And we have also learned from library and data workers from around the country over the past 10 years. The Civic Switchboard project was originally funded in 2017 by the IMLS, but the work started, as I'll share, a few years prior, and I'll talk about that, the origins of that. But we've learned so much from folks, and really our work represents case studies of library workers and data workers connecting community members with data. We've learned from folks at the Ohio State University libraries, public libraries, government libraries, academic libraries around the country, as well as through partnerships with the National Neighborhood Indicators partnership, which is a consortium of civic data intermediaries throughout the country. So on this slide, I just have a brief agenda to guide us through the talk. I'll be sharing a bit about the Civic Switchboard project and some of the concepts that guide our work and the major activities that we've done through this project. Our work really focuses on building civic data fluency or literacy within libraries. So in turn, libraries have the capacity to support community use of data. We have different approaches that we take with building this data fluency in libraries, and I'll be sharing those. We've also learned through engagement with libraries around the country a range of roles that libraries may play with connecting communities to data about communities. So I'll spotlight some of those roles and current efforts, and then I'll look forward to discussion. So as Josh mentioned, I'm based at the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh, where I teach in the Masters of Library and Information Science program. Before that, I worked in academic libraries, including the University of Pittsburgh and the University of Chicago, where my work really focused on what were then really emerging roles around research data support services at libraries. And it was during that work in academic libraries that the Civic Switchboard project, which I'll share more about, really began. As Josh also mentioned, the University of Pittsburgh has a provost initiative around responsible data science. And I've really brought my background and positionality as a librarian to that work and thinking about human-oriented, responsible data work. I lead a program within that initiative called the Responsibility Program, which works to build understandings of what responsible data work looks like in different contexts of the university. The project that I'll be focused on today, again, is the Civic Switchboard project. And this project originated about a little over 10 years ago. Like many cities, states throughout the country, as well as internationally, we've seen policies calling for government public data to be made open by default. And that was certainly the case in the city of Pittsburgh as well. In 2014, there was a local ordinance that set an expectation that public offices within the city of Pittsburgh would make data available as open data. This ordinance specified that there would be a mechanism and infrastructure to support that work. And as is the case, globally, this led to the establishment of an open data portal. The unique aspect of this was that the open data portal is hosted at the University of Pittsburgh. So the University Center for Social and Urban Research, which is a unit within the University of Pittsburgh, is the host of this open data portal. And it's a partnership with the City of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County. And the fact that it was based at the University of Pittsburgh and was being developed in 2015 is really what led to the Civic Switchboard project, because the folks who were building this infrastructure in response to the ordinance came to the university library system where I was based at the time and said, I think that the work that you do in libraries really aligns with the work that we do in open data. You focus on making information available, helping people find and understand and evaluate information. And that's something that we're doing in open data as well. So we started collaborating together. As I mentioned, I was based in a unit that was focused on building data services in the library. The Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, which is the open data portal and program that's based at the University of Pittsburgh, started working with us in the library as well as the public library system, and we were collaborating in different ways. At the University of Pittsburgh, we were involved with the selection of the platform that was used for the data portal. We worked with the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center with thinking about the metadata schema that would be used to describe the open data sets that the City of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County were sharing through the data center. We also thought through together some approaches for protecting privacy. We looked at specific data sets and thought about minimizing risk in identification of individuals represented in that data. We worked together to also look at our own holdings at the University of Pittsburgh Library System, specifically in our archives. We looked at archival collections that we could package and prepare as open data sets and made that data available as open data on the portal. There was rich collaboration between the data center and the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh as well. They worked together to build out some data training for community members, some opportunities for data users to gather and to learn from one another. So we started working together, and it really sparked some questions for us. Well, first, we recognized that there was this really rich synergy between the work that's happening in open data spaces and the work that happens in libraries. And we started thinking about more broadly, what does open civic data, I'll share more about how we define that term, but what does this work look like in other libraries and communities? We recognized that there were common values and goals that were shared by libraries and open data partners, like in our case, the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center. We knew that there were unique aspects of the fact that the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center was at the university, and it was very easy for us as a university library system to build a collaborative relationship in turn. So we knew that the ways that we were working with open data, our open data partner, wouldn't maybe be a way that other academic libraries or public libraries would work because of our local context. So we were interested in better understanding just the general shapes that this work between libraries and data partners, open data partners, what shapes this work could take. So I wanted to share some guiding concepts. As I mentioned, we use the term civic data in our projects, and we've had some really interesting recent conversations with librarians over the past couple of years who've said, that's not a term that maybe they've used in the past. It's a term that the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, our partner, that's how they described the data that they were making available. In our conversations with some librarians, that term wasn't necessarily one that was embedded in the language that was being used in data services, for example. But we use this term to represent really data about communities. Our work primarily focuses on local data portals and the roles of local libraries and collaborating with those data portals. But we think about civic data as data that provides insight into our communities and decision-making and policies that affect people and places. And this includes data that's shared by governments as well as local organizations like libraries. We use also the term open data, which I imagine is a term that folks on the call are familiar with. This is, we use a pretty traditional way of defining open data as data that's free to access and download, that's reusable by anybody for any purpose, that's machine readable, that's absent of personally identifiable information, that's as complete as possible, and where modification and resharing is permitted. There are two other concepts that are really core to our work. One is a term that we learned from the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, which again is this collaborative of open data, local open data, portals and initiatives. They use the term data intermediaries, which when I started working with the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, this was a new term for me, but it's one that I think resonates with what the role of libraries as well. Data intermediaries defined by folks within the NNIP as the individuals and organizations that help people find, evaluate, and use information. And our project, the Civic Switchboard project, takes the position that libraries, because of the shared goals and values that of libraries and open data partners, libraries are well positioned to be really important and impactful data intermediaries in their communities. We also really think about the concept of a data ecosystem in our projects. So we suggest that the first step in identifying what roles libraries might play with open civic data is to step back and really build an understanding of the players, the participants of the current data ecosystem. So what is the network of people and organizations who work with civic data in a region? What's the infrastructure that supports data work? In our trainings with librarians, this is where we often start. We invite folks to really take stock of who works with community data currently. And then we encourage this as a starting place for identifying potential gaps in the ecosystem. Is there a service area that's currently not being supported around community data, or is there an opportunity to augment and complement existing activities? So we suggest that before libraries say, oh, this is the role that we're going to play, stepping back and considering, well, how can we work within this ecosystem to support our communities, to address community interests, is an important starting point. We have some broad principles that have underpinned our projects that have been funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. As we mentioned, we recognize that we couldn't pick up what we were doing in Pittsburgh and suggest, oh, that's the perfect approach for data work that's shared between libraries and open data partners in Austin or in Nashville or in Ann Arbor. Instead, we suggest that building an understanding of a local ecosystem and understanding a wide variety of successful local practices is an important starting point to gain insight into the potential range of roles that libraries might play. So as part of the Institute of Museum and Library Services funding, I just wanted to spotlight a couple of activities that we've done through since 2017 through funding from the IMLS. One really exciting aspect of our original grant from the IMLS is that we were able to disperse small awards to libraries throughout the country that collaborated on a project with their equivalent of the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, a local open data partner. And we supported 14 fields, what we call fields projects that were partnered in nature. And these projects range from libraries doing training with a specific user group like teens, data training, or libraries that were interested in doing an ecosystem map so that they could take stock of what was currently happening and then build a service area from there. So on this slide, I just captured the organizations that we worked with, but we learned a lot from this. We were able to then take what we learned from the partners and extrapolate and see a different kind of a range of roles represented here. And all of these field projects and the partners that worked on this wrote up case studies, which I'll share a link to our guide, which highlights each of these cases. The guide itself is kind of a great entry point to our project. This guide is intended to help library workers and data partners identify roles that make sense for their local ecosystem, and also helps libraries find partners to do this work. So if you're interested, there's a link in the slides, but this project outlines, or this guide outlines, ways to locate data partners, approaches for understanding your ecosystem. We highlight different library roles based on what we've learned from libraries throughout the country. And we also include the case studies that spotlight different types of roles and provide models of what libraries might do. This is just an example of one of the case studies that's captured in the guide. The IMLS has supported other projects as well through the Civic Switchboard project. We were able to develop open educational resources, or OER. The primary audience for these were for library and information science faculty in programs that are the equivalent of the one that I work at. Curriculum that might be brought into library science graduate work, so that emerging library workers, leaders can build an understanding of the potential roles that libraries can play with civic data in their communities. We also host a discussion group for library workers and their partners in open data partners, people who are doing local open data work, to connect with one another. This is a very low traffic, in full disclosure. This is very low traffic discussion group that we have here, but we invite folks to use it as a way to share resources or to ask questions. It has a pretty sizable membership. We also share opportunities to connect with one another as a community of practice. So I'll be sharing this at the end of the talk, but we hold bi-monthly community calls for library workers, data workers, to come together to discuss different topics related to civic data work, to share what they're doing. So if there's anybody ever interested in sharing their work at a community call, we'd love to host you. But we do post when these are on the operators group, so you'd be very welcome to join us. And I'll share more about our next community call at the end of this talk. Through this project, we also host workshops for libraries and data partners. And this has been funded in different ways by the IMLS. Most recently, the current grant that we had until recently, we were able to do regional workshops. So we ran 7 workshops that were hosted by library partners throughout the country that do civic data work. And we spotlighted at each of these institutes what that local data host or local library host was doing in their own communities. But these are very hands-on, interactive workshops that, again, begin with building understandings of what is happening in one's local ecosystem, and then considering roles that make sense for the library based on that. We do really focus on this idea of building civic data fluency or literacy within libraries. We just define civic data fluency as the skills and knowledge to find, evaluate, and use open civic data. And we take different approaches for building the capacity of librarians in this space. And our idea is that, if we support growing civic data fluency in libraries, that in turn, libraries may support civic data fluency among their patrons. We have a couple of guiding approaches for the training that we do, and I wanted to share these, and maybe it will spark some conversation, because I'd love to know if folks are on the call also do any sort of data literacy training with a focus on community data. I'd love to share, to talk together about approaches that you've used. We are really guided by adult learning theory, because the folks that we engage with primarily through the Civic Switchboard project are adults, often working in libraries. So we take some influence from best practices from adult learning theory. We take a very low-tech approach to the data training that we do, and we really focus on building a data justice orientation into the training and the workshops that we offer. On this slide, just quickly, these are some ways that we think about our training. We recognize that with adult learners, we like to learn by connecting to our own experiences and real life needs. So we think about ways that through our training, we can connect to the needs of library workers. And we do that by inviting folks to think again about their local ecosystem, their local context, the context of their own library, and the community interests that they're aware of. And we prioritize activity, very interactive activity, and design activities that allow for different approaches and independence. These are some tenets that we bring into our own data training with librarians. And this is just an example, and this is a resource that we have in the guide, but we invite folks to do a planning canvas for a service or an activity that they might do around civic data in libraries, and it very much situates the librarian in their local context and invites them to think about, how this role in this activity would be designed based on their local situation. We're really inspired by writers, artists to do very low tech data literacy work. Some folks on the call may be familiar with the Dear Data project, where two friends exchanged representations of data in their lives and visualized data in their lives. And we think that this kind of tangible approach to data, to building comfort with data, is a good approach in our training. We really decenter technology. All the activities that we do with library workers are hands-on. We have heard that a barrier to library work in this space is feelings of intimidation around data, open data, or a feeling that we hear sometimes, I'm not a data person, or I don't have strong tech skills. And we really try to invite folks to recognize that really we're all data people, and the roles, the training that library workers have is really aligned with the types of activities that would benefit community use of data. So we encourage folks to build comfort, and we step away from computers with our training. And we do have our materials packaged. And if anybody's ever interested in talking more about the materials that we use in our training, I'd be so glad to connect with you. We also really focus on bringing a data justice lens to the training that we do with library workers. We are inspired by scholarship around data justice, which asks us to look critically at the ways that data has been used to perpetuate harms. And we invite folks to think about ways that through their own work in libraries or in open data spaces, they can push against potential harms, mitigate potential harms, and involve broader community participation in the data lifecycle. So on this slide, I have just an example of activity that we do with library workers that is inspired by artist and researcher Mimia Noaha's writing on missing data sets that may not be collected or available to us. And we invite reflection on why that data may be missing, and also strategies that may be used to collect that data if it's in service of our communities. So by building some data fluency in libraries, and by encouraging libraries to think about their local ecosystem, we suggest that libraries can identify and potentially take on a data role that is, again, in the interest of their communities, that meets meets needs of their local ecosystem, and they may serve their patrons. So we encourage the starting point by looking at our ecosystem, by thinking about community interests, and then thinking about partners that libraries can work with. And in our resources, as I mentioned, through the field awards, we were able to learn the types of roles that libraries might play here by looking at the projects and the efforts of libraries throughout the country. So we spotlight in the guide a range of roles and some potential models for libraries that are doing this type of work. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of these roles. We do see libraries taking a really active role, public libraries as well as academic libraries taking an active role in data training, again, for different audiences. At Providence Public Library, for example, a field award that was part of the original Institute Museum and Library Services grant focused on designing education for teens to build some comfort and some data skills, again, focusing on community data. At Rice University, they designed this is just an example of a data literacy program that was designed in collaboration with a local open data partner that supports the development of skills like finding data, asking questions of data, visualizing data. One of the major things that we hear libraries say they want to be able to do in terms of role is use civic data to better understand their own communities, to design services that are kind of driven by this understanding of their communities. So we see examples of libraries applying their data skills and better understanding the patrons, their own local system. This is just an example of a project in Kansas that really took a data-driven approach to understanding patrons and who were currently using, where current usage of libraries is coming from. We also see a role of libraries in creating civic data and making data available through open data portals. In Pittsburgh, for example, the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, again, our data partner, hosts data sets that are shared by different civic organizations throughout the country, or throughout the region, excuse me, including the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh has data sets that have been made available through the portal. And if you're interested in reading more, again, there are case studies in the guide. I did want to, as we near a close of the formal presentation, share a couple current efforts with an invitation to get involved in one. So many of us, probably all of us on this call, are aware of the threats to open data that we're currently seeing, data being removed from open data portals, including litigation around those removals. As I was preparing these slides, I saw an example of a case where data has been restored. In this case, agricultural data has been restored as a result of a lawsuit. We know that you may have heard of efforts from library workers and archivists that are focused on creating copies of data sets and backing up that data. The Data Rescue Project, which is a project that is supported by a number of different data organizations, library-centered data organizations, is doing a great job in tracking different initiatives related to creating copies and preserving data sets that may be at risk. They have a data rescue tracker where they're capturing data that has been archived in the Internet Archive or Data Lumos project at University of Michigan. And this is a great way if folks in libraries and archives are interested in identifying ways that they can get involved in archiving data sets that may be at risk. This is a great resource and project to engage with. You can check in with the data rescue tracker to understand, where these efforts have been directed at this point. But one of the initiatives of the Data Rescue Project now is to also gather stories that really speak to the human impacts of public data, open data. And they're working to collect these stories to spotlight, the importance of access to information. As part of the Civic Switchboard project, and the community calls that we host, we've hosted the Data Rescue Project team in the past. A couple of months ago, they came and they talked about ways that libraries could get involved. And as our next step in collaboration with this effort, we are working to support the data storytelling activities of the Data Rescue Project. We're holding a community call on May 22nd, which will bring people together to build strategies for collecting data stories. So there's this invitation from the Data Rescue Project to contribute stories. With the Civic Switchboard community call, we'll be taking a step back and co-creating a set of strategies that then we can implement in capturing some stories. So you'd be very invited to join us on this Zoom call, again, with the goal of ultimately contributing a story to the Data Rescue Project. And then just finally, before we open it up, Josh had shared that at the University of Pittsburgh, we also have a project that focuses on growing community around an open data tool that really underpins many open data portals. This project is called CKAN, and it is the software that underpins data.gov, the federal data portal, the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, as well as a data portal that's based at the College of Arts and Sciences at the Ohio State University. And this project is working to build, because it's open source, it relies on community participation in around sustaining the software. So we're working to build workflows and grow the community around CKAN, and also think about whether this is a software that might be applied to data management projects at libraries. So there's a link to that project page as well. So I wanted to invite us, I'll open it up for discussion with my thanks for the opportunity to share some of our work here at Pitt. And Josh, I'll turn it over to you if there are any questions that came in or comments.
Yeah, thanks, Nora. So I'll just invite folks again that if you want to go ahead and ask a question, please put it in the Q&A and we'll relay those along to Nora. But while folks are thinking about that, I wanted to touch back on the data storytelling for a second. So we had a question on our end sort of alluding to this, right, in the current climate where there's a lot of focus on the availability of federal data sets. What are the most important actions that different partners in a local civic data ecosystem might take? So thinking about entities, whether they be individuals or university groups or, your local government groups that might not just produce local data, but might rely on for some of their own analyses, federal data sets that are increasingly uncertain at times. So beyond the storytelling, are there other thoughts that you have on other actions that those kinds of data partners should be taking?
I do think that these efforts to create backups of the data is a major one. I would suggest that, this coordinated approach for identifying data sets that need to be archived that haven't yet been archived is a good starting point. So connecting with the data rescue project, although the data rescue project has primarily been focused on, in fact, it may be focused at this point on federal data sets. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to think potentially about also data sets at a more local level, that there may be benefits to creating captures of, but thinking about whether there's a way to coordinate those activities. I will say that the data storytelling piece, I know that the Data Rescue Project is really keen on gathering more of these stories. So I think it's a great way for us all to get involved at this point, to share. Many of us probably work with patrons, or we may be researchers ourselves who work with civic data, and just sharing those stories as part of advocacy for the importance of open data is a great starting point, I think.
Yeah, I think the lesson of the times is sort of that a lot of us maybe have taken for granted the idea of easily being able to publicly access these data, and efforts like data rescue and your project, I think, are really kind of surfacing like some of the invisible stuff that has to happen behind the scenes to allow that ecosystem to continue to exist and function. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I'd be really interested if folks on the call know of more locally focused efforts to archive local data sets, local public data sets. Um, we're also seeing shifts in local legislation and state legislation that may unfortunately necessitate that. So we do see coordination on this national level with the data rescue. I think there's a really interesting discussion to have about like how we might model that on a more local level as well.
I wanted to ask because, I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone in libraries and academic library, but there may be many attendees here today that are coming from this as the perspective of someone who works for one of the other entities or organizations in a local data ecosystem. And so I wanted to ask, based on your experience with the Civic Switchboard, um, are there examples that you could share or advice that you could share for those data partners about maybe how and why they would be approaching libraries for, mutually beneficial partnerships that you're trying to talk about in this work?
Yeah, I think honestly, having it just knowing your local ecosystem, and even having just a building at first, creating contacts across libraries and data partners as a first step is a great step. It may not be clear at this point, where that work may be mutually beneficial or maybe aligns. But I think we take the position that knowing and from the perspective of the library, knowing your local data partners, and from the perspective of data partners, knowing your library is a great start, so that should there be opportunities to work together, those relationships are built. So I think that my reaction to that would be, it's not necessary, I think, to know what collaboration would look like at this point. We're so aligned in the work that we do across these two types of entities, and making contact is a great start. And so that you can also beginning by representing and being able to speak to the work that both partners are doing is a great place. And then I think, the potential for collaboration will come from there. That's my reaction to that question, Josh. Yeah.
Are there maybe examples from like the field grants, the field research projects that you were able to do where you could point to common characteristics that you would consider to be like conducive to successful civic data partnerships, or maybe common barriers that you've seen data partners encounter that hinder those kinds of partnerships?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the the barriers. A common barrier that we see is maybe making a case within a library that this work is aligned with the role of the librarian or a particular unit within the library. So sometimes I think the initial barrier is shaping that case to your administration to show like synergy between that work, and we have some guidance for how to do that. Another barrier is that, many of us, we did work with a couple of folks who had people in designated like community data roles, but that was pretty uncommon. And instead, library workers were, situating this work around existing activities. So that was a barrier as well. But I think success comes from getting your administration on board and maybe connecting with some goals of your organization, the broader goals of your organization. So I know with academic libraries, we see being able to attach themselves to, for example, a strategic plan, the 4-year, 5-year strategic plan, and saying, this relates to that strategic plan, is something that we did at Pitt as a way to make a case for this activity. I think that, so those are a couple of barriers, but I think that really the success comes from like the relationship between the partners and crafting a project that aligns with both the interests. And that's a pretty high level response to that, Josh, but those are some initial thoughts.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. I want to make sure to ask those. So the first one, Esri's ArcGIS Online platform is a growing one for open data portals. We definitely see this in like local government entities. Do you have any concerns about using a proprietary platform for an open data portal as opposed to an open source platform like CKAN?
Thanks for this question, Kevin. I think that Esri is one that, from a preservation perspective, it's so widely used that I don't have a concern that it's going to disappear tomorrow and no longer be supported as part of an open data option. I think the position that we take, so I don't have a preservation concern. I think that the position we take with the CKAN project is that using open source when possible, we recognize that there's resources that are involved with supporting an open source platform like CKAN, but using it aligns with the values of the open data worlds, and that we can contribute collectively to open data initiatives by participating in this open source community as well, by participating actively and sharing what we're doing with CKAN. We could benefit other open data initiatives as well. So I guess my concerns would be more, is there an opportunity to align selection of the platform with the goals of open data broadly? So I see a synergy with open source and open data. But we really do recognize that in our discussions with libraries, sometimes open data is not, open source is impossible to support from a practical perspective. So I certainly don't want to suggest that there's a value judgment placed on selection of an option like Esri.
Yeah, and then Frank says, thank you so much for the inspiring talk. I'm a director of a nonprofit organization and would like to know more about how to use CKAN to host survey data for public use. How do you think about using Open Science Framework or Dataverse for this purpose, or choosing CKAN for our volunteers? So maybe like a specific use case there.
Yeah, I think there's a really good use case, Frank, at the Ohio State University, the center. I have it on the, let me see if I'm sorry, I wanted to go back. I would suggest that maybe connecting with folks in the College of Arts and Sciences, the CHRR repository, they did kind of an inventory and a comparison across different platform options, oh, I see Kelsey Badger, who's on the call, is highlighting CHRR. They did this evaluation and did this cost benefit analysis of different options that were out there. So I think it might be a great starting point to learn from their example. OSF, Dataverse, certainly we're seeing those are being used in important ways for sharing research data. I think there's, the potential to leverage some applications that have been developed for CKAN that may fit your needs. So there's, a community of developers around CKAN who are sharing applications that maybe you might find that this particular platform option might be really fitting a need for you. So if you're interested, I think it was Frank, please reach out and we can connect you with some folks who are involved in CKAN if you want to think about whether it might meet your needs with survey data.
Nora, we have just a few minutes left, so I want to ask you one closing question. But before I do that, I just want to put a plug in for the next event in this series that's happening June 20th at noon. It's called Sustaining Future Historians, the Case for Preserving Ephemeral Geospatial Data with Karen Majewicz at the University of Minnesota. I'm going to pop a link in. I think it's a really good connection to some of the things you were saying about at the local level, like what do we need to be thinking about snapshotting, and that presentation really ties to that idea of, the efforts that could be happening at a more local level to preserve versions of historical data when a lot of community data providers, it seems, are really focused, and rightly so, on getting the most current and relevant data out to their communities. So I want to put in a plug for that. And then just sort of a concluding question, I'm sorry to hear about the IMLS funding. I want to understand, maybe what you see as the future for Civic Switchboard moving forward, whether it's funding related or not, but based on what you've learned, what's next?
We really do want to continue our efforts with the Civic Switchboard project. We have been envisioning our focus is really thinking about sustaining a community of practice around civic data work in libraries. So that would mean continuing some of the activities like a community call, which we can do without funding. There are certain things we can do without funding. There are certain things that would require an investment of funds, like in-person gatherings for library workers and data partners. So I think we have crafted for ourselves two different models, the things that we will do, beyond at this point, the grant is now formally completed. We plan to continue to do community calls and the sort of lightweight community of practice support that we can, but we've also identified the things that we'd like to be able to continue to do. And those things would be like, doing continued training, bringing people together, maybe field awards, things like this. So we're thinking about that, Josh, and we're invested in this work. So we're looking to continue in the ways that we can in either case.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I wish you the best of luck and thank you for doing, initiating this really important work. And we're right at about time. So I just want to invite the audience to join me in thanking Nora for this great presentation. Thank
Thank
you so
you
much.
so much. And I want to come to that next talk. That sounds terrific.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And I think Jordan mentioned at the beginning that we'll have a recording of this presentation available soon on CURA's YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for that as well. Thanks, everybody.